So we want to welcome you guys. This is Chelsea Wins with the Office of African American Affairs, and I am gathered with some awesome people today. We will be talking about PPP loans, and so on the call today, I have Jermaine Mitchell, who is with Dream Springs, and I have Kevin Williams, who is also with Dream Springs, and along with them, we have Alex Horton, who is with ID Economics, and so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them. They can kind of tell you guys what they do, and then we will go ahead and get into this conversation. So, Jermaine, do you want to go ahead and start?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for the invitation to be here. Dream Spring has literally been in Albuquerque for, I guess it's 27 years now.
Oh, wow.
And it was a year ago that we changed our name from Axion to Dream Spring, which created an opportunity for us to maintain our presence, our local presence, not only in the state of New Mexico, but also in the other states in which we serve. And so we've been successful in our rebranding. We have been successful in continuing our mission, which is basically to provide microloans to minority business owners. And not only do we provide loans, but we also offer technical support. A lot of times small business owners are looking for information on, who can I go to learn more about accounting? Who can I go to learn more about payroll, HR, just basic business related questions they may have. So we have multiple organizations in which we partner with. And those partnerships allow us to do a series of webinars, whether it's just small business webinars, whether it's building credit webinars, whether it's webinars on things like what's going on now, the PPP program, just providing services for small businesses that they often seem to miss out on.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I am grateful to be joined by my coworker, Kevin Williams, who's been working with the Small Business Administration, our SBA loans, as well as our PPP loans. And I guess Kevin can just start off letting people know what is a PPP loan and who qualifies for a PPP loan.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thankful to be here today as well. Jermaine, thanks for the warm introduction there. My role at the organization, so I'm part of our SBA program, and I was the lucky individual that was on a call last March when the SBA originally announced the Paycheck Protection Program. That was part of the CARES Act, if you've heard that talked about. And there were a lot of different programs that came out of that, but the Paycheck Protection Program specifically is designed to provide assistance for small business owners, independent contractors, sole proprietors. Most any business with less than 500 employees was eligible for a PPP loan during the first round. And it's interesting, I mentioned the timing of that because March 2020 was when a lot of the coronavirus pandemic was starting to come into focus for the country. But I think at that point, some of the assumptions were different than maybe what we've been able to see unfolding. I mean, I was still making summer plans I thought were going to be able to happen at that point. And but the design of it was recognizing that, okay, 2020 was going to be a different year for small business owners. So we're getting more hardships, more barriers, more obstacles. And I look at the PPP program as something that was designed to replace payroll expenses for businesses to cover those for a number of months to help to ensure that small businesses got through that period of time. And looking back at, I think the language that I heard thrown around last March and April was just this fear that the coronavirus pandemic would become an extinction event for small business owners, something that small business owners wouldn't make it through and that our country would fundamentally look different going forward in terms of the business landscape.
Right.
And I'm thankful that we've been able to see a lot of businesses that have been able to survive. We've been able to see people have been able to pivot and thrive throughout this time, which is great. But it's also still been a really challenging time to be an American or a person of the world in general, let alone be a business owner on top of that. And so within this, the PPP program is essentially it's 2.5 times your monthly payroll. And so, for example, if a business has a $10,000 a month payroll, they'd be qualified for a $25,000 loan. That loan, if they use that money on appropriate expenses, which is usually payroll, utilities, other business expenses, it's eligible for forgiveness. And so some people have asked, is this a grant? Is it something that I'm definitely not going to need to pay back? But I think the best way of explaining it is a forgivable loan. I think as long as you play within the means of the program, you use the money like you're supposed to, you can trust that it can and will be forgiven. So that's what kind of happened last year and where we're at now. So in late December of 2020, there was a new addition to the CARES Act, which was the act from last March. There's the Economic Aid Act, which both reopened the Paycheck Protection Program, allowing maybe someone that didn't approve during the first round, if they didn't know they were eligible, didn't know that they were going to need it necessarily, or just didn't take the time to apply, couldn't find a lender, all the different barriers that kept people from being approved. So if you didn't receive a first round PPP loan, you can apply and be approved again. There's also the option to apply and receive a second PPP loan. So if you were funded sometime between last March and August, if you received a first round loan, you can also apply and receive a second round loan. And so I think that's a pretty good overview. And I know we're going to get into some questions and conversation in just a moment here, but the one piece I wanted to tag on is I think that from my perspective, my role at the organization, I've been attending a number of events and chatting with folks about the PPP program. And there's a lot of good information. And there's also a lot of incorrect information that's circulated. And so I'm going to encourage everyone that's listening, okay, if you were told at one point you weren't eligible, if you weren't sure if you were, just to reevaluate that and to make sure that you're getting all the information you're gathering from a step. And this conversation today maybe being a good source of that. But it's also worth noting that we're talking in early February right now, and it's very possible that if you're listening to this months from now, some things might have changed slightly. And so just recognize that this is a fluid situation and a somewhat fluid program.
Kevin, can you share a little bit about the process with DreamSpring's application?
Yeah, absolutely. So DreamSpring, like Jermaine said, so we're a nonprofit. The people participating in PPP, it range from these really large multi-billion-dollar banks, and then you've got us, where we're a community-based nonprofit with a small idealistic staff that does what we do because we want to help folks out. And so as a result of that, I think our approach to PPP has been fundamentally a little bit different than a lot of organizations, where part of why we leapt headlong into this last year was we saw as an opportunity to help people. And so the program that we've designed is really supposed to be an easy experience for borrowers. It's supposed to be an easy online application, something that folks can get through pretty easily. But we also recognize that there is a big need for good quality technical assistance for the application process, because maybe you don't know if you're eligible, maybe you don't know if you qualify. And so the process, Jermaine, would be essentially we have an online application. It walks you through there. There's some links to outside information. There's some spaces to upload documents. You submit what you have. Our team looks through it, and if it looks good, we'll usually approve it pretty quickly. It's also really possible that maybe you didn't provide something correct the first time, or you need a little bit of help with it. And at that point, one of our staff members will reach out to you to try and correct anything or make sure the application is fully within the SBA's guidance for how it needs to be submitted.
And that website for DreamSpring's PPP loan application?
It's dreamspring.org. So dreamspring.org. Yeah.
One word, .org, yes.
.org. Awesome.
And also we have an 800 number for those who may have questions. And that 800 number is 1-800-508-7624. That's DreamSpring's 800 number for questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jermaine and Kevin, for that information. I think that, some of the things that you guys have gone over is going to be, really helpful for the people who are listening. There are a few things that, as you were talking, Kevin, that kind of came to mind that might be of interest to the audience. I also wanted to let everybody know who is on the call. We have Alex Horton, who is with ID Economics. So Alex, we'll definitely be coming over to you because there's a few things that I want to ask you too, because I know that your business, there's a few things that you guys can offer. that might be of benefit to the community. And one of the things that you have brought up, Kevin, was it was about applying for the loan. And so, can you guys kind of clarify? And Alex, kind of jump into to help the audience understand what exactly does Dream Springs offer, and is there anything that they need to come um, with prior to contacting you guys, as far as like the information that they're collecting? Should they reach out to other resources? And then, because it sounds like from your end that you guys pretty much go through and pretty much approve the loan. Am I correct on that, or how does that work?
Yeah, I can comment on that a little bit. So part of what's been confusing to people is this is an SBA loan, so it's administered by the Small Business Administration. It's a government-backed loan, but the funds are being distributed and approved by DreamSpring. And so you can partner with the different lenders. So for example, the loan decision is something that we're issuing internally. And so in terms of what do they need to research and gather and do ahead of time, I actually would usually encourage someone just to get on the website and see what the application is going to ask you for. One of the first things it does is it has you enter your entity type, meaning are you a single member LLC, are you a sole proprietor, anything like that. And it'll usually tell you what documents you're going to need to upload later in the application. And glancing at that, because a barrier for folks has been knowing, okay, well, what do I need to provide for proof of payroll? And it's kind of hard because it depends on your entity type. But if you enter that in the application, it'll usually give you a pretty good explanation of, hey, here are all the different documents you can upload to be allowed. And then what's nice is you can take a moment, step aside, gather those, have them ready. And when you're ready, go back to the application, get everything uploaded. A lot of the information you need to have ready is pretty simple, though. It's usually outside of the payroll documents. It's asking you generic questions about what's your EIN, what's your business address, what's your personal address. A lot of the information that you'll probably know off the top of your head. I think the biggest barrier for folks is usually just being aware of what they need for documentation to show that to show what their average monthly payroll is, because that's what we're calculating based on. We have to see what was your payroll, and at this point it's usually looking at 2019 documentation. In some situations it can be from 2020 as well, but so I think first step would be hop online, go to dreamspring.org, click the apply now button, and just kind of see what it asks you for. And it's best, I think it's usually good if you try and submit correct information the first time. It saves a little bit of time on our end on the review side of things. But I think some people get a little bit too stressed. If they don't do it perfectly, they're just going to be declined, or we won't call them back, or anything like that. And it's really possible that even if you make a little mistake, you don't check a box correctly, something like that, we're not going to just decline you. That'll just mean that you get a call in a few days from someone saying, hey, you indicated that your employees are not based in the US. Is that correct? And they'll usually clarify, though, I selected the wrong box there or something.
Right. Well, thank you for that clarification. And Alex, I know that we have spoken and you've talked. I know that you have some experience behind this. Can you kind of introduce yourself and let us know what ID Economics offers, and maybe a little bit about the experience that you guys have come across with PPP loans and the clients that you guys assist?
Yeah, no, that's be great. I'm Alex Horton. It was interesting. We were getting ready to launch our business incubator program last March, and we had a cohort of startup businesses. We usually work with startup businesses, trying to get them started, growing, and into like a retail location. And so once when the pandemic happened, we kind of pivoted a lot too. We were talking with a few foundations, and a lot of the clients I was working with didn't have all of that stuff together. So other people just started reaching out like, hey, I need help with PPP. And like Kevin and Jermaine said, the first round just went out the window, right? And it put everyone into a panic because they wanted to get this, they wanted to get these documents. And it was like, okay, well, let's just start creating a checklist and let's start submitting these things. The SBA site is crashing, and then it was to go through their bank. And so it was like frantic, right? I think everyone was so frantic because, okay, you have the virus, just the uncertainty, right? When things are uncertain, people are scattered. You're not able to get these things together. And a lot of the businesses I worked with, we were trying to get them into a online base with having their stuff online at the click of the dime. But they were bringing me boxes of stuff like, okay, here's all my stuff. How do I put this together, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, we got to first get this uploaded, right? And get it uploaded and go from there, right? And so like that was pretty much part of the work we did, right? Was getting it uploaded. And then we started diving into seeing that a lot of our businesses, didn't have their taxes filed, or one person said, I got declined, or my bank won't work with me because, I didn't have I'm not that A-list client, right? So I've sent in my application, they haven't gotten back to me. And so we did a program with the Albuquerque Community Foundation and the South Valley Economic Development Center called Project Preserve. And that was just to help set up a hotline to do this. And it seems like DreamSpring now has picked that up and ran with it, because now they have their hotline number, which is great. Like that's how it should be, right? Because the person administrating the loans should be able to help walk through it right away, right? And so what we were like, hey, how do we just get the documents online, get them to where they're ready to go, get them to the application, refer them right over, but they have everything, right? And it was like, being that we had the relationship, they did feel comfortable. Okay, well, I don't upload nothing online. And so, okay, well, you'll scan it and you'll send it to me, right? So it was a little bit of walking through the process, which during times of uncertainty really pay dividends. So coming now on the second round, I'm so glad we're able to actually, everyone's like, it's like such a more calmer situation, right, of getting this in. And I've actually sent a few people through DreamSpring's process, and it's so much more streamlined. I mean, there's so many questions that would, like they said, would actually kick you out if you don't qualify. So you're not wasting your time, right? And I just seen that as just a huge thing. I mean, I think it took 5 minutes, and click add, and then it was like someone will be reaching out to you. I mean, it was just the most simplest process now this time, and one thing I wanted to talk to DreamSpring about is, and this is my question I had is, can we talk about like the myths, right? Because I think there's a lot of myths around PPP, and some of those myth busters, right? Of like, do I qualify? What kicks me out? Like, I'm behind on my taxes. What do I do, right? And things like that. So.
Right, so good. Jermaine or Kevin, whichever one you guys want to tackle that one.
Kevin?
Yeah, I can hop on that at least. And I think Alex has a wonderful overview from your perspective on that. And I loved hearing it, partially because it just kind of reminds me of how far we've come in terms of what we're able to provide for folks. Because our perspective on this, we've been through, I think, 5 or 6 different iterations of how we're processing these applications and what we're able to provide for them. Because when this was originally launched, we just had paper documents we were trying to get people to fill out on a PDF online. It was really hard. And a lot of people might have approached their bank and been told they weren't eligible. And the problem is that there are a lot of myths that are out there. So for example, during the first round of funding, a lot of banks were just automatically declining anyone with a request under $150,000. That was pretty common because the way the funding structure was set up, unfortunately, it really heavily incentivizes institutions to prioritize larger loan requests. And as a result of that, a lot of banks made the choice that, okay, anything under that's not worth our time. And then there were extra rules on top of that that might be added where, okay, maybe you need to have a certain credit score. You have to have a relationship with a lending institution, or you need to have any sort of a special relationship with where we might have applied. And the hard thing is, I think a lot of folks might have applied, been declined because of a rule that that institution had been applied themselves. It wasn't actually instituted by the SBA, wasn't part of the actual bill or law. And as a result of that, they haven't come back and tried to see if they qualify. But eligibility is pretty basic, though. You had to have been in existence on February 15th, 2020. So, for example, was your business around February 15th, 2020, and can you show that if you were asked to? You're not you're not asked to prove that at the time of application, but you might be asked to prove it at some point later during forgiveness. And that can be as simple as a tax return, articles of organization, a business bank statement. It's pretty simple. And then the other question is, do you have payroll expenses? And payroll, because this is a government thing, what they're defining that as is something that is taxable income. And so if you file a Schedule C tax return, that's one really common way for people to qualify. And that's usually a single member LLC, a sole proprietor, an independent contractor. It's like you might drive for Uber and file a Schedule C return. And what you're looking at there is, did you have any net income? Um, so what they're looking at is line 31 of your tax return. Did you have anything listed there? Did you have any income that you're able to claim? And then outside of that, if you're bigger, maybe you got a couple employees, just looking at what are you paying in payroll, and they're looking at what you're paying payroll taxes on specifically. So I've had a number of folks I've talked with where they might pay their employees under the table, something like that. And unfortunately, that doesn't work well with this program because it is what the government's going to be looking at there in terms of what was taxable payroll. But really, if you were in business on February 15th, you have payroll or you have net income on your Schedule C, you have less than 500 employees, usually the qualifications from that point are pretty broad. There are a couple of other screen out questions and things like that where they're going to ask, like, okay, if you were convicted of fraud in the last 5 years, for example, that's a screen out where they're not willing to approve you there. There's another question asked about criminal background. That one is not necessarily a decline reason in of itself, but sometimes they might ask for further information. Um, and then they're basically just looking at, okay, do you have employees? Are you paying them? Will you pay them in the future? And it can be pretty simple. I don't know, Alex, what are some of the myths you feel like you've heard from people? Just give me an example, one at least.
No, you know what? I think you hit it right on the head, right? I think that was the biggest one. You hit the one I really wanted to talk to, because I talked to a few companies and they were like, yeah, I got declined, and they said it was due to credit, right? And they were just like kind of scratching their head. And then, after the second time they got them to somewhere else and they got approved, right? So I feel like you just hit it right on the head. I really appreciate you breaking that down, because it was an institutional's criteria, not the SBA's criteria. And so I really appreciate the work that you guys have been doing, and helping us to being able to get access to capital for clients we work with and people in the community to have a place to go to get these submitted. So, one other thing too was, I think you did talk about the banking relationship. And so, being that you guys aren't a bank, they still have to have a bank account to be able to link these funds to, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And so DreamSpring is what's called like a non-depository institution. So we don't have accounts. Your money. So for example, if we approve you for a PPP loan, it needs to go somewhere else. And so you do need to have some sort of a bank account. It depends a little bit on entity type. So for example, it's usually needs to be a business bank account specifically, but if you're an independent contractor or sole proprietor, it's a little bit more flexible there. But typically, once you're approved, you'll know your approval amount. You've got a signature or two you do online. And at that point, you just enter your bank's deposit information. And that's another area we get a lot of questions from folks who are like, okay, I don't know what my routing number is. And we can usually help you track that down as well, because funny enough, we do a lot of these deposits and we usually know this number looks real, this one doesn't. And we're kind of used to helping people sort that out when need be. But and I think the good piece there is that we're very motivated to help people problem solve, where we want to see everyone who's eligible get qualified for this. And so, for example, if you are having an issue with your bank account or something like that, we might have a good local contact to put you in touch with. Okay, they can help you over here, get an account set up, or here's what you need to do. But we're very willing to troubleshoot with people as needed there.
Yes, and this conversation has been so awesome. I think that, going into this, I think that a lot of people's minds will now be at ease for people who haven't wanted to go to apply for the loan, or like you guys said, both with Dream Springs and ID Economics, you've both talked about businesses that you've encountered that, have said, well, I didn't get qualified for this because of this, or whatever. And I think that, it's been awesome to hear about those myths. So thank you guys for addressing that. Another question that I had is, what does the timeline look like for, like, from the start of applying for the loan to getting qualified or getting the funds? Can somebody speak on that?
Yeah, I can talk about that as well. So the process would be typically that you apply, and we have different queues that your application will probably move through, but essentially, we're trying to make sure we look at every application within about 3 to 4 days. I'd love for that to be same day. We're working towards that. We're getting closer and closer. Um, but usually it's a couple of days. We'll look over your application. At that point, if we have everything we need, we do a quick final review on it, which might take another day or so. And then we send it off to the SBA. And how that works is we just put in your information and we recommend an approval. This time around, one thing that's a little bit different. Last rounds, so there was the initial batch of funding. We would send it off to the SBA and they'd give us a response in about 30 seconds. This time it's taken a little bit longer. Usually it's 24 to 48 hours. But essentially at that point, that's maybe, let's call it from your application to your time of an SBA approval. If we're doing things as efficiently as we'd like internally, it's about a week. From
Okay.
there, closing down the funding, usually it's a day or two to generate closing documents. And then it's got to be, once you sign, it's usually 24 to 48 hours before funding arrives.
Okay, so not long at all.
No, and I think, I mean, if you, our process on this, I'm usually thinking as someone that is kind of overseeing some of these, the intake of applications. It's about the number of applications we're getting per day. So right when we launched our application, we were usually a little bit longer than that. It might take us 7 or 8 days to get to that first review stage. Now as the application volume, we're getting fewer applications per day. We're getting faster and faster. And so ideally, I'd love to have it be that you apply 2 hours later, you get an email from someone that says, oh, this looks good, or hey, we need this additional document. But that's the aspirational goal we're moving towards.
Right, right. Well, nonetheless, I mean, it still sounds like it's a pretty quick turnaround. So they should, once somebody applies, they should be hearing back um, within a few days to a week. So
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's entirely reasonable. And I think part of what's nice, and Alex definitely mentioned this as well, the very first round of funding, there was kind of this frantic mentality of where can I apply, who is accepting these applications, why am I being declined? And um, what's really nice from our perspective is there was the second round of funding and we made some improvements there in terms of the way we were handling things. But now we've had months to get ready for this. And so the good thing is that we've got good tools in place to help people apply. We've got our team members all trained up, and it means that the borrower experience is dramatically better than it was during the first couple of rounds, because at that point it was a little bit rushed and frantic on our end as well.
right. And so I think another question that the audience is going to want to know is forgiveness, because I think that that's something that a lot of people are talking about. And so, Kevin, is that, can you speak more about what that looks like? So just so that, the audience has a little more information around forgiveness on this law.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for us as a lender, the forgiveness part of this is the most important piece, where it's like, okay, someone giving you a low interest rate loan, that's great, but that's not actually that helpful when you're looking at a year that's been as hard as 2020, and 2021 is not starting off easy for small business owners either. And so the forgiveness portion, if your loan amount, I'm going to continue using my $25,000 number I threw out earlier. If you got a $25,000 loan, ideally every ounce of that's forgiven. So you get $25,000 of forgiveness. And how that typically works is that once you've spent all your money on payroll, and this looks different. So if you've got 20 employees, it's a different experience than if you drive for Uber. It looks a little bit different, but you come back and you provide documentation that your money was spent on payroll or these other eligible expenses. The money needs to be paid out within 24 weeks of when you received your PPP loan. And so what that usually works out to is, gosh, I don't even know how many months that is. It's like almost 6 months, I think 5.5 maybe. But so you'll come back, provide proof of what your payroll expenses were, and then we review that. So we've been processing first round PPP forgiveness applications So far, I think we've done about 700 of them. And what's great is that of those 700, all of them have been fully approved by the SBA. So all of them have been fully approved for forgiveness, which is great because for all those business owners, that means that their loan is fully forgiven. They don't have to make any payments to us. There's nothing else that's needed there. And so the nice piece, I think one of the main questions I get from people is, can I guarantee that this is going to be forgiven? Like, can you tell me ahead of when I accept the loan, I'm not going to need to pay this back? Because if you're accepting a $25,000 loan, you might be a little bit worried about making payments on that if it's not forgiven. And so I think we've got some really good resources, but the simple answer is if you use it like you're supposed to, if you use it for payroll, the loan can and will be forgiven. You got to have documentation of that. But really, our team is pretty motivated to make sure that we give you every tool and resource you need for that. And our closing loan officers are really well set up to be able to talk through any questions that someone might have at that point before they actually sign their loan agreement, so they understand what that process looks like. But honestly, I've been really pleased with that portion of the SBA because it's pretty simple. You usually sign a couple documents. We might even have the information we need on file for you. So we try and make it as easy as possible.
Yes, and I think, you know, just listening to what you were talking about, it does sound like it's a pretty streamlined um, process. I think that the biggest thing that I'm hearing is documentation, documentation, documentation. Is that correct?
Yeah, and one neat thing as well that's kind of changed. Now there's a new forgiveness application, and I mentioned this earlier that stuff kind of tends to change around month to month. So I think it was around January 20th they came out with a new version of the forgiveness application that's even easier. The nice piece there is that business owners are not even being required to upload documentation with their forgiveness requests anymore. They're told to keep it on hand and to have it on their records for 5 years. But the experience now from our end at least is that we're sending our clients a link that's got their information pre-filled on it. So anything we know about them already, that's already filled in. Usually, I think on the simpler version of the application, there are 3 boxes you need to enter, which is essentially how much your loan do you want to have forgiven, and asking, I think there are 1 or 2 other eligibility questions on there, but from a lot of the people I've talked to, it takes 2 or 3 minutes. They sign it, they send it off to us, we send it to the SBA, and once it's reviewed, it can be pretty simple. The documentation, the new threshold there is if your loan is less than $150,000, you're asked to retain that for your records. And I am going to strongly encourage people, you do want to set aside those payroll records and make sure you have them, because it's easier to find them now than it will be in 4 years if the SBA came and asked for them. Um, but you'll want to have those on file. But if you're less than $150,000, you keep those for your records. You sign the form saying you use the money like you're supposed to, send it off to us, and we send it to the SBA. If it's above $150,000, we give you a little box where you can upload some documents at the time of the application.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for that information. I think the last question that I have, and then if anybody else has anything that they want to add, please feel free. But can you guys and whoever wants to speak on this, what is the deadline that we're looking to? And is there anything that, you know, the audience needs to be aware of as far as the money that is available that ties into the deadline?
Yeah, I guess I'll keep going with that one as well. So application deadline is March 31st, 2021. Um, the funding that was allocated for this second round, so the Economic Aid Act, was $284 billion. Back when this was announced, I was in the camp of people where I was a little bit worried that money might go quickly this time around as well. So the very first round of PPP funding was, I think, 310 million or something like that, and it was gone in about 10 days. So a great piece that we saw a week or so ago, about 10 days into this round of funding, there was only about $34 billion that had been allocated. The good piece of that is that means that the SBA representatives I've been talking to are pretty confident funding should last at least until March, but hopefully hopefully for the full timeline here. I think it's a good idea for people to apply sooner rather than later. during the second round of funding, the application deadline was August 8th, and I had a couple of folks that applied August 6th and weren't quite able to get their application pushed through. And so I'd say apply sooner rather than later, especially because if there is any additional information we need to get from you, that gives us a couple of days to work that out. And it's always nice to not have as much of a deadline. It is possible that the rate of funding allocation speeds up or maybe money starts going quicker, but I'd say that I think we've got definitely some time ahead. There doesn't need to be the same stress mentality as there was last April necessarily.
Awesome. Yes, that sounds so good. So I think that, for all those who are listening, it's important to go ahead and hop on that. Don't sit around and just wait thinking that those funds are still going to be available. And so, I think that um, the conversations that we've had today has been awesome. I think that, like I said earlier, it's going to put a lot of people's minds to ease, and maybe hopefully push them to apply. Some of the myths that you guys have talked about, maybe those were a lot of things that people were thinking about, and now they'll be a little more comfortable with going forward and actually applying for those loans. Before I close, was there anything that anybody wanted to add, or any words of advice or wisdom, since you guys are the experts and you guys are dealing with this on an everyday basis? Is there anything that you guys want to leave the audience with?
There is one thing I want to add, because sometimes banking can be a hindrance. And so I think it's important that we remind everyone that credit unions are available. And if there are no banks available for you to set up an account, reach out to one of your local credit unions. That's what they're there for. And they're very supportive as well. So we tend to forget about them, but they're there for a reason. So I just wanted to add that in as well.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. And to add on to that, is that something that you would recommend they do before they apply for the loan, or is that something they can do after they apply, or what would the process look like for somebody who's listening?
Kevin, I'll let Kevin answer that from the application perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'd put that in the category of something that you probably should resolve at some point, but I wouldn't wait to apply because you're still waiting to go down to your credit union. So from our end, I've had situations before where we get towards the point where someone's approved and we realize that they do need to get a new account set up somewhere. And that's fine on our end. We're very happy to work with the borrower to wait a couple days before closing there. And so I would say if you think you might be eligible for a PPP loan, you're interested in evaluating it, the first step is to create an application and just go dreamspring.org, click the apply now button. I think hopefully for most folks, it's a 5 to 10 minute process. And then if at that point, if your application goes through and maybe you hear back from our team in a couple of days that things are looking good, then maybe that'd be the time to reach out to the credit union and start trying to pull that together. Because I don't know, on my end, I would hate for someone to go and open up a new account somewhere simply because they think that they might qualify, and maybe our team as to isn't able to get to an approval because they don't realize they're not eligible. So I'd say, I mean, apply, get that ball rolling, and then maybe move on from there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. So just to kind of clarify, I'm so excited about the 18th. So for everybody who's listening, we will be doing the second round of this conversation, and it will be a live event. So that's going to be February 18th at 3 p.m. If you have not registered, you can go to oaaa.com. And you can go there to apply, or I'm sorry, not apply, but you can register for that event. So you definitely don't want to miss out because, like I said, we're going to be back on and we're going to be answering the questions. So our hope for you is that, like we talked about today, you guys can go to dreamspring.org, click the apply now. It's going to take you only about 5 to 10 minutes to get that application going. If you have any questions, you can reach their hotline, and that number is 1-800-508-7624. And if you need assistance with the process or anything like that, you can reach out to ID Economics. They are there. Alex, can you let the audience know how they can get in touch with you guys? And kind of how you guys can walk them along the beginning steps before they reach out to Dream Springs, or after, or in the beginning, in the middle. but how you guys can go along with that process.
Yeah, if you have a box of documents, bring them to us. We'll help scan them in for you. Get it submitted in, but you can reach out at 505-922-5671 if you just need to bring some stuff and go through some things before you get ready to apply and just get all your ducks in a row to make it easier for DreamSpring. Please feel free to give us a call. You can also email us at ahorton@ideconomic.com, and we'll be more than happy to set up an appointment with you and walk you through the process and get you teed up to go to DreamSpring. So yeah, feel free to reach out anytime about any of that, and we'll help out where we can. So
Yes, so thank you guys so much for that. And again, I thank, both of you guys, both DreamSprings and ID Economics, for being on this call today. And like I said, I am so excited to continue this conversation, and hopefully, the audience will go out, apply for those loans, and then come with their questions on the 18th. So we'll be ready for them. But again, I just thank you guys. I hope this was helpful to the community. But yeah, I thank you guys, and I can't wait to see you guys on the 18th.